A police sergeant found a German Shepherd puppy shivering beneath a closed laundromat awning. He thought the right thing was simple: keep her warm, scan for a chip, and find her owner. But the next morning, a mother German Shepherd appeared across the street and refused to come closer. The puppy saw her, then pressed deeper into the officer's arms. Soon, he learned there were 2 more puppies hidden in a winter greenhouse. To save them all, he had to do something harder than rescuing them. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like, share, and subscribe for more K9 Justice Tales. Winter had begun to loosen its hold on Marrow Falls, but it had not left gently. Snow still lay in high, tired ridges along the curbs, darkened by sand and exhaust. The rooftops of the old commercial blocks shone white where the afternoon sun touched them, while the alleys remained blue with shade. Meltwater ran in thin silver lines from gutters, froze again where the wind crossed the pavement, and turned every step near the railroad district into a small decision. Sergeant Lowell Archer Strickland had already made enough decisions for one day. His shift had ended 40 minutes earlier. The badge was still clipped to his belt because he had not stopped at home yet, but the patrol jacket had been folded on the passenger seat of his own truck, beside a paper sack of coffee beans, a carton of eggs, and a replacement bulb for the porch light he had ignored for 3 weeks. The truck heater hummed low. The radio on the dash was off. For Lowell, that was the sound of evening, not peace exactly, but the absence of being needed. He drove past the boarded windows of the old hardware annex, past a laundromat that had closed before Christmas, past the convenience store where freight workers bought coffee before dawn. The railroad tracks ran behind the block, half buried beneath snow, their steel edges catching the light like something sharp underwater. A movement beneath the laundromat awning made him slow before he understood why. At first, it looked like a scrap of dark fabric stirred by the wind. Then it shifted again, and a small head lifted beside the metal bench near the front windows. Lowell eased the truck to the curb. A German Shepherd puppy stood beneath the awning, no bigger than something that should have been carried in 2 hands. Her coat was black and honey tan, still soft with puppy fuzz, with a pale mark on her chest like a drop of cream. One ear had made a brave attempt at standing up. The other folded sideways as if it had changed its mind halfway through. She was dry, which meant she had found cover before the last snow shower. But she was cold. Her small body trembled in quick waves, and when a box truck passed on the main road, she pressed herself closer to the brick wall. Lowell did not open his door right away. Old habits lived in the body, long after a man stopped wearing them on his sleeve. He had spent years around working dogs, enough to know that fear did not always look like running. Sometimes it looked like stillness. Sometimes the most frightened animal in a parking lot was the one that had not yet decided which direction would kill it. He took his phone from the cup holder and called dispatch. "Marrow dispatch, go ahead." "It's Strickland," he said. "I'm off duty, private vehicle. I've got a loose German Shepherd puppy outside the closed laundromat on Cargill and 9th, no collar visible. Puppy appears young, alert, cold, not injured from what I can see." The dispatcher, a tired-sounding woman who had answered his calls through blizzards, bar fights, and one memorable complaint about a raccoon inside a church pantry, asked him to hold while she checked animal control availability. Lowell watched the puppy through the windshield. She watched him back. That was the part that made him keep his breathing even. Not the cold. Not the empty storefront. Not the fact that a dog that young had no business being alone near traffic. It was the way she looked at him, as if she had not yet decided whether he belonged to the list of dangerous things. "Animal control is tied up on the east side," dispatch said when she came back. "Shelter's over capacity because of the cold. They're asking whether you can safely assess and hold until morning if the puppy allows handling. They'll log it as emergency foster, pending chip scan and stray report." "Copy," Lowell said. "You know the drill?" "I know the drill." He ended the call, then sat for another few seconds with one hand on the wheel. Knowing the drill was easy. Call it in, photograph the location, avoid chasing. Check for obvious injuries. Keep the animal warm. Transfer to proper care as soon as possible. None of that explained the ache that had opened quietly beneath his ribs. Lowell stepped out of the truck and closed the door without letting it slam. The air carried the smell of old snow, wet brick, and diesel from the tracks. He stood beside the front bumper and did not move closer. "Easy," he said. The puppy's upright ear twitched. Lowell lowered himself near the curb, far enough away that she would not feel cornered. His uniform pants creased at the knees. The ice beneath his boot gave a faint crack, and the puppy flinched. "I know," he murmured. "Everything's loud today." She did not come forward. She did not run. Lowell pulled off his dark winter jacket and laid it on the pavement between them. The navy fabric spreading across a dry patch beneath the awning. He slid his hand back and rested both forearms on his knees. For a minute, nothing happened. A leaf skittered from beneath the bench. Somewhere beyond the block, a train horn sounded, softened by distance. The puppy looked toward the tracks, then back at him. Her nose worked the air. Lowell kept his eyes lowered, his voice level. "You don't have to decide fast." It was the kind of sentence no one had said to him when he needed it most. The puppy took one step, then another. Her front paw touched the edge of the jacket sleeve. She stopped there, weight half forward, half ready to retreat. Lowell did not reach for her. He had learned the hard way that trust was not a door a man could pull open from his side. The puppy lowered her head and smelled the fabric. The jacket carried his day on it. Cruiser vinyl, cold air, coffee, a trace of leather from his gloves, and maybe underneath all that, the faint old ghost of dogs he had known before. She climbed fully onto the sleeve. Lowell swallowed once. For years people had called him steady, dependable, controlled, the kind of officer you wanted first through a door and last to leave a bad scene. He had accepted those words because they were easier than the ones he avoided. Lonely, closed, afraid of needing anything that could be lost. The puppy leaned forward and touched her nose to two fingers he had left resting on the pavement. The contact lasted less than a second. It changed the whole shape of the afternoon. "There you go," Lowell whispered. He waited until she did it again. Then he turned his hand slightly and scratched the soft fur beneath her chin. Her tremble did not stop, but it changed. Less panic, more exhaustion. When he lifted her, he supported her chest with one hand and her hindquarters with the other. She stiffened at first. Then her small body folded into the front of his shirt, and one paw hooked clumsily over the edge of his collar. Lowell stood with more care than the weight required. He carried her along the laundromat wall and checked the space behind the bench. No box, no blanket, no tipped food dish, no towel tucked behind the trash can. He walked the side alley, looking beneath the metal stairs and behind the snowbent shrubs that separated the lot from the tracks. "Anyone else?" he called softly. Only the wind answered. He widened the search to the rear of the laundromat. The snow there had been disturbed by old tire tracks and bird prints, but he saw no cluster of small paw marks leading to a den. Near the chain-link fence, dirty snow had melted into mud. A few strands of tan fur clung to the bottom wire, too high for the puppy in his arms. Lowell noticed them and went still. The puppy nosed at the flap of his shirt pocket. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's not yours, is it?" Across the street, the convenience store clerk was breaking down cardboard boxes beside the back entrance. He was a thin young man in a red vest over a gray hoodie, his cheeks wind-chapped, his name tag turned sideways. Lowell crossed carefully, keeping the puppy tucked inside the jacket. "Afternoon," the clerk said, straightening when he recognized the badge. "Something happen?" "Found this one under the laundromat awning." Lowell turned slightly so the puppy's face showed. "Anyone come in asking about a missing dog?" The clerk's expression softened at once. "Poor thing. No, not a puppy. But there was a bigger shepherd around early this morning." Lowell looked toward the old block. "How big?" "Full grown. Female, maybe. Skinny but not starving." She came up from the tracks, stopped near the dumpster, then crossed toward the storage buildings. He pointed east with a flattened box. "Wouldn't come close. I thought about putting something out, but by the time I got back, she was gone." "Collar?" Didn't see one. Lowell gave him a card and wrote his personal number on the back. If you see her again, don't chase. Call this number, or dispatch. The clerk nodded, still looking at the puppy. You think that's the mom? Lowell glanced down. The puppy had tucked her nose into the bend of his elbow. Her eyes were half closed now, not from comfort alone, but from the end of whatever strength had kept her standing. I don't know yet, he said. It was the most honest answer he had. Back at the truck, he took photographs of the location, the puppy, the fence, and the strands of fur. He sent them to the animal control contact dispatch provided. A few minutes later, a woman named Harper Lyle called him from the east side of town, her voice brisk over the sound of another dog barking somewhere behind her. You're Strickland? Yes. Dispatch says you've got a shepherd pup, 6 weeks give or take. That would be my guess. Any injuries? None visible. Cold, alert, responsive. No collar. Keep her warm. No cow's milk. Water first. Small amount of appropriate food if you've got it. Clinic scan in the morning. I'll enter the foster hold. And Sergeant? Yes. If you see the adult, don't let your badge convince you she understands you're helping. Lowell looked toward the tracks. I won't. Good, Harper said. People chase scared mothers all the time and call it rescue. The line went quiet after she hung up. Lowell stood in the parking lot with the puppy inside his jacket and felt, unexpectedly, as if he had been warned about more than a dog. His house sat on a narrow street lined with maples whose branches still held snow on their north sides. It was a small place with a clean porch, a stubborn garage door, and a kitchen window that looked over a fenced backyard he had never used for anything except shoveling a path to the trash bins. Inside, the house received him the way it always did, furnace ticking, refrigerator humming, clock working through the silence, 1 second at a time. Lowell placed his jacket on the kitchen floor and set the puppy gently on top of it. She stayed there for exactly 3 seconds, then she followed him to the sink. You had a perfectly good jacket, he said. She sat on his boot. Lowell stood very still. There had been dogs in his life before, disciplined dogs, working dogs, dogs that watched his hands for commands and moved through danger with a courage that had once made him feel less alone. But this was different. This was not a partner trained to search, track, hold, or heal. This was a small, cold creature who had decided his boot was the safest place in the room. He filled a shallow bowl with water and set it against the wall. The puppy drank too fast, sneezed into the bowl, and bumped it with one paw. Water slid under a chair. Lowell reached for a towel. The puppy reached it first. She caught the loose corner in her teeth and pulled backward with all the seriousness of a creature twice her size. The towel unfolded across the floor. Lowell looked at her. She looked back, the folded ear tilted outward, the pale spot on her chest bright against the dark fuzz. No, he said. She tugged again. It was not funny. Not really. There was water under the chair, groceries still in the truck, a porch light still broken, a report waiting in his email, and a stray hold file that would begin in the morning. Still, the sound that escaped him was almost a laugh. It came out rough, unused. The puppy froze, as if surprised by it too. Then she wagged once and attacked the towel with renewed purpose. Lowell drove to the farm supply store before it closed and came back with puppy food, a small bed, cleaning pads, a soft collar, 2 chew toys, and a bottle he bought because the label said puppy, even though he suspected Dr. Crane would tell him in the morning that he had misunderstood something. He moved electrical cords, boots, gloves, and cleaning supplies out of reach. He put his groceries away one-handed because the puppy kept trying to climb onto his foot. By the time darkness pressed against the kitchen window, the puppy had eaten a small meal, stepped in part of it, left 3 paw prints near the stove, and fallen asleep halfway on the jacket and halfway on the floor. Lowell stood over her with the soft collar in his hand. Temporary emergency foster, he reminded himself. In the morning, the clinic would scan her. Animal control would post the report. Someone might be looking for her. Someone might be missing her badly. He had no right to build a feeling around a creature that might already belong somewhere else. The puppy stirred, opened her eyes, and made a tiny sound that was not quite a whine. Lowell crouched. "All right," he said. "Just for the paperwork." He looked at the pale mark on her chest, at the mismatched ears, at the way she had dragged his towel, as if claiming the first ridiculous thing in a house that had gone too long without disorder. "Nori," he said. The puppy blinked at him. "It's temporary." She yawned, placed her chin on the toe of his black police boot, and went back to sleep. Lowell stayed there longer than he meant to. Outside, the snow along the fence caught the porch light from a neighboring house and turned blue. Somewhere beyond the old commercial blocks, freight wheels moved along the tracks with a low metallic groan. The sound reached his kitchen faintly, like a reminder that the world had not stopped just because one small life had entered it. Lowell rested the collar on the counter instead of fastening it. Temporary things, he knew, should not already feel like they had a place. By morning, Lowell's kitchen looked as if a small weather system had moved through it. A dish towel lay under the table. One corner had been chewed into a damp point. 3 paw prints marked the lower cabinet beneath the sink, though Lowell still had no idea how Nori had managed to step in something after the floor had already been cleaned. The soft bed he had bought sat empty beside the radiator. Nori was asleep on his left boot. Lowell stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm in his hand and watched her breathe. The house had made room for new sounds overnight. The scrape of tiny nails, the tap of a bowl against chair legs, the faint sigh a puppy gave when she settled deeper into sleep. He had slept lightly, waking twice because he thought he heard her cry, once because he did not hear anything at all. At 7:40, he called Cedar Ridge Animal Clinic. The receptionist gave him a mid-morning opening after he explained that Animal Control had logged the puppy as an emergency foster. Lowell wrote the appointment time on the small notepad he kept near the phone, though there was no reason to write it down. He remembered times, case numbers, addresses, license plates. He had built a life around remembering the things that could matter later. Nori woke while he was folding an old flannel shirt into the bottom of a laundry basket. She lifted her head, blinked at him, and immediately tried to bite the sleeve. "That's transportation," Lowell said. Nori pulled harder. He had used a low, firm voice with grown dogs that could cross a room on command. Nori interpreted the same voice as encouragement. She braced both front paws against the shirt and shook it with the gravity of a sworn duty. Lowell stood with one hand on his hip, fighting an expression he refused to call a smile. "Fine," he said. "You can bring the sleeve." The drive to Cedar Ridge took 11 minutes. Nori spent the first 3 trying to drag the flannel through the basket slats, the next 4 discovering that the plastic rim made an unsatisfying chew, and the last few curled on the folded shirt as if the entire struggle had been someone else's idea. Lowell kept the truck heater low. The morning was bright and hard, the sort of winter light that made every window flash and every roofline look cut from paper. Snowbanks along the streets had settled into rounded walls. Water ran along the gutters where sunlight reached, then vanished under crusted ice at each intersection. Cedar Ridge Animal Clinic sat in a converted brick building at the corner of Juniper and 5th, with a green awning, a small salt-streaked ramp, and a row of paw prints painted along the lower window. Lowell had driven past it for years. He had never had a reason to notice the hanging baskets stored upside down beside the door or the handwritten sign asking visitors to keep nervous animals in their vehicles until called. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet dog, and coffee. A woman with a carrier on her lap nodded at Lowell's badge before looking down into the basket. "Well," she said softly, "that's trouble with ears." Nori placed one paw on the basket rim and sneezed. Lowell gave his name at the desk. The receptionist, a young man with dark curls and a calm voice, checked the animal control note already attached to the appointment. That small detail helped Lowell breathe easier. Paperwork existed, procedure existed. He had not simply made a feeling and called it a decision. They were placed in an exam room with pale blue walls and a poster showing dangerous household foods for dogs. Nori tried to eat the corner of the poster when Lowell lifted her onto the folded towel on the metal table. "Doctor," Elsbeth Crane entered without hurry. She was tall in a narrow, practical way, with ash-blonde hair tied low at the back of her neck and reading glasses pushed up on her head. Her white coat was clean except for a faint smear of something near one pocket, and her hands looked like they had learned gentleness through repetition rather than softness. She glanced first at Norrie, then at Lowell, as if deciding which one was more likely to resist the appointment. "You must be the temporary arrangement," she said. Lowell looked at Norrie. "That's the official term." Dr. Crane smiled only with one corner of her mouth. Official terms keep people honest. They do not always keep them unattached. Before Lowell could answer, Norrie lunged at the stethoscope tubing. Dr. Crane caught it neatly. "And you must be the reason we lock cabinets." The exam was careful and quiet. Dr. Crane let Norrie smell each instrument before it touched her. She checked the puppy's eyes, gums, ears, abdomen, joints, and paws. Norrie tolerated most of it with brave impatience, then attempted to sit on Dr. Crane's wrist during the dental check. 6 to 7 weeks, Dr. Crane said. Old enough for softened puppy food, too young to be wandering around traffic. A little underweight, not dangerously so. No obvious injuries. Lowell nodded, arms folded, because nodding was safer than relief. Dr. Crane ran a microchip scanner across Norrie's shoulders, then down her back and along each side. The device stayed silent. She repeated the scan more slowly. "Nothing. No chip," she said. Norrie looked pleased, as though silence meant she had passed. Lowell looked down at the puppy's pale chest mark. "What happens now? Harper will tell you the legal part." Dr. Crane wrote notes in a green-bound chart. "I'll tell you the living creature part. Small meals. Warm water available. No stairs unattended. Watch for vomiting, diarrhea, coughing, or sudden lethargy. Keep her away from unknown dogs until we know more. If there is a mother nearby, do not assume separation means abandonment." Lowell heard the sentence as more than information. Dr. Crane capped her pen and looked at him over the frames of the glasses she had lowered onto her nose. "Dogs make decisions with the information they have," she said. "A mother may leave one puppy only because she has others she cannot leave." The exam room seemed to become quieter around that. Norrie had found the drawstring on Lowell's sweatshirt and was pulling it with increasing commitment. He freed it from her mouth, and she immediately put both paws on his boot, as if claiming the place she had chosen yesterday. The door opened after a short knock. Harper Lyle stepped in carrying a clipboard and the smell of cold air. She was shorter than Lowell, built solidly, with a chin-length sweep of reddish-brown hair tucked behind one ear and a gray animal control jacket zipped to her throat. A red leash, frayed from use, hung from one hand like a tool she trusted more than most people trusted policy. Her eyes moved quickly around the room. Puppy, table, door, Lowell, Dr. Crane. "So this is the laundromat princess," Harper said. Norrie barked once, surprised by her own voice. Harper did not laugh, but something in her face softened. Big opinion. She photographed Norrie from several angles, scanned the paperwork, confirmed the location where Lowell had found her, and explained the hold process in plain language. Photos would be posted through animal control. The shelter would be notified. Cedar Ridge would keep the medical record. Lowell could keep Norrie temporarily if he followed the foster instructions and remained available if an owner came forward. "You cannot adopt a dog that is still legally lost," Harper said. "I understand. I'm saying it because people often understand with their heads and make other plans with their kitchens." Lowell almost answered too quickly. Instead, he looked at Norrie, who had fallen asleep with her chin pressed against the black leather of his boot. Her breathing was small and even. The sound did not belong to him. Not legally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he had already begun listening for it. "I understand," he said again, quieter. Harper studied him for a moment, then signed the bottom of the form. "Good, then we'll keep everybody honest." By the time they finished, Norrie had woken and tried to climb into Dr. Crane's open medical bag. Dr. Crane removed a roll of gauze from her mouth with professional calm. "Ambitious," the veterinarian said. "Criminal," Harper replied. Lowell lifted Norrie into the basket before she could build a record. Outside, the sun had sharpened. The parking lot was wet in patches where salt had eaten into the ice. Lowell carried the basket against his side, one hand over the rim to keep Nori from climbing out. He had nearly reached the truck when Nori went still. Not sleepy still, alert still. Lowell felt the change before he saw the reason. Across the street, beneath a bare maple tree at the edge of a closed pharmacy lot, stood an adult German shepherd. She was thin but not wasted, with a dark saddle over her back and a narrow, intelligent face. Her coat held the dull roughness of outdoor living through winter. One ear carried a small nick along the edge. She did not bark. She did not lower her head. She simply watched the basket in Lowell's arms. Nori rose on unsteady paws. For one suspended moment, Lowell thought the puppy would cry out, leap, struggle, become all instinct and recognition. Instead, Nori looked at the adult shepherd, then pressed herself backward against Lowell's chest. The movement struck him harder than fear would have. Dr. Crane came out first, wiping her hands on a towel. Harper followed, clipboard tucked under one arm. Neither of them spoke right away. The shepherd across the street took 2 steps off the curb, then stopped as a pickup rolled between them. When the truck passed, she was still there, body angled toward Lowell, eyes locked on the puppy. Lowell set the basket carefully inside the open rear door of his truck and lifted Nori out. He held her where the adult shepherd could see her, but he did not move forward. The shepherd crossed the street several yards away from him, her paws silent on the wet pavement. She stopped at the edge of the clinic parking lot. Nori trembled once. Lowell loosened his arms just enough that she could have leaned outward if she wanted to. She did not. Her small body tucked more firmly into the front of his sweatshirt, her nose pressed beneath his chin. Harper's voice was low. Do not close the distance. I'm not. Dr. Crane watched the adult dog's ribs shift with each breath. She came for the puppy. Then why won't she come to her? Lowell asked. Because something is more important than what she wants. The answer settled in the cold air between them. Lowell opened the rear door wider and placed a folded blanket on the seat. Then he stepped back, leaving the path to the truck clear. It was an offer, not a trap. At least he hoped the difference could be understood by a dog that had survived long enough not to trust easy openings. The shepherd looked into the truck. She took 1 step. Nori made a small sound against Lowell's chest, not quite fear, not quite recognition. The adult dog froze, her nose lifted, testing the air inside the truck. Her eyes moved from the basket to Lowell, from Lowell to the street behind her, and then beyond them all toward the older commercial blocks to the east. Lowell followed her gaze. There was nothing there except the road, the snowbanks, the warehouse roofs, and the thin, dark line of the railroad beyond the buildings. The shepherd backed away. No, Lowell whispered before he could stop himself. It was not a command. It was almost a plea. The shepherd's ears turned toward him. For a second, Lowell thought she might change her mind. Instead, she moved to the edge of the lot and stood beneath the clinic sign, shivering once in the wind. Harper reached slowly into the supply bag she had brought and took out a small bowl. Dr. Crane went inside and returned with softened food. They placed the bowl near the parking lot entrance and stepped away. The shepherd did not look at it. She looked at Nori, then she turned. She walked east along the sidewalk, stopping once near the pharmacy window to glance back. The sunlight caught the nick in her ear. Then she rounded the corner and disappeared. Lowell stood with Nori against his chest until Harper touched his sleeve. Sergeant. He blinked as if the street had been louder than it was. I can circle the block, he said. You can, Harper replied, slowly, from a distance, but if she has other puppies, pressure may make her move them, Doctor. Crane nodded. A scared mother does not make plans we approve of. She makes the plan she believes will keep something alive. Lowell looked down at Nori. The puppy had stopped trembling. Her eyes were half closed, but she had not relaxed. One paw remained hooked in the fabric of his sweatshirt, holding on with all the strength her small body had. She followed us here, he said. Harper's expression had lost its earlier edge. Yes. And also, yes, he hated that both things could be true. Lowell placed Nori in the basket and secured it on the rear seat. He drove slowly through the next intersection, then along the street parallel to the pharmacy. He checked alleys without blocking them, watched gaps between warehouses, paused near the loading docks, and kept the windows down despite the cold so he could hear movement. He did not see the shepherd again. Once he thought he caught a glimpse of dark fur beyond a stack of pallets, but when he stopped, only a torn black garbage bag lifted in the wind. He made one more loop behind the storage buildings, then forced himself back toward the clinic. Harper was waiting near her vehicle. "No sign?" she asked. "No good." Lowell frowned. "Good? You didn't push her into showing us the place before she was ready." That should have satisfied him. It did not. By the time he returned home, afternoon light had moved across the kitchen floor. Nori climbed out of the basket, took 3 steps, and found the towel she had claimed the night before. She dragged it toward Lowell's boots, then abandoned it halfway and curled against the side of his foot. The house was no longer silent, but now the sound of her breathing carried another shape inside it. Somewhere beyond the clinic, beyond the pharmacy, beyond the warehouse roofs and the railroad line, an adult shepherd had walked away from the puppy she had come to find. Lowell rested one hand on the counter and looked toward the east-facing window. Nori was not the only one who had been lost, and whatever waited for that shepherd to return was still out there in the cold. For the next 3 days, Lowell lived 2 lives that kept brushing against each other. In uniform, he was Sergeant Strickland of the Marrow Falls Police Department, answering calls that had nothing to do with a puppy asleep in his kitchen. He stood beside a sedan that had slid into a snowbank outside the high school and asked the driver to breathe before trying to explain. He checked on an elderly man whose mailbox had been buried by a plow and who insisted the city had done it personally. He took a report from a pharmacy clerk about a broken window that turned out to have been cracked by ice falling from the roof. He did the work. He wrote the notes. He answered the radio. But whenever his hand went to his coat pocket and touched the folded photographs there, the other life pressed in. One photograph showed Nori sitting on Lowell's kitchen floor, with both front paws on the towel she had claimed. The pale drop of fur on her chest stood out clearly. One ear had risen higher overnight, the other still folded sideways, giving her the look of a dog undecided between bravery and sleep. The second photograph was not as good. It had been taken from the clinic parking lot, just before the adult shepherd turned away. Her body was angled toward the east, one ear nicked, head slightly lowered, the line of her back dark against the snow-bright street. Lowell had printed both images at the station, because his home printer had not worked since autumn. Officer Bram Ellis noticed. Bram was leaning against the break room counter with a paper cup of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in foil. He was shorter than Lowell, thicker through the neck and shoulders, with a square face that always looked as if he had just heard something he intended to make fun of. His dark blonde hair was cut close, and his uniform jacket hung open because he ran warm even in winter. "You starting a missing dog bureau out of your locker?" Bram asked. Lowell slid the photographs into a plain envelope. "No. That means yes. It means no." Bram took a bite of the sandwich and looked toward the envelope. "You're off at 4, right? Let me guess. Patrol by day, puppy detective by night." Lowell closed the locker harder than necessary. Bram's grin faded slightly, not because he was offended, but because he was not stupid. "I'm not saying don't do it. You just did. I'm saying don't confuse being useful with being needed." Lowell turned. For a second, the break room held still between them. The hum of the vending machine, the smell of burnt coffee, the distant squawk of the radio from the squad room. Bram looked away first. "All I mean," Bram said, softer, "is a puppy can make a quiet house sound like a reason." Lowell did not answer. The words followed him through the rest of his shift anyway. After work, he changed out of his duty shirt, but kept his dark jacket, badge clipped inside where it would not lead the conversation before he did. He drove back to the old commercial district with the photographs on the seat beside him and a list from Harper Lyle folded under the visor. "Do not trespass. Do not chase. Do not corner. Ask. Record. Leave contact information." It looked simple in writing. In practice, Lowell found that asking required a kind of patience he was not used to using. A badge could open a door quickly. A personal question could close one just as fast. At the feed store, a cashier remembered a shepherd near the loading bay before sunrise, but could not say where she went. At a closed motel under renovation, a painter had seen a dark dog crossing the rear lot 2 mornings in a row, moving too fast to approach. A mechanic at the tire shop recognized the photograph, frowned at it, and said the dog had watched him from across the alley while he poured old coffee into the snow. She didn't beg, the mechanic said. Just watched like she was deciding whether I was worth the risk. Lowell wrote that down even though it was not exactly information. At home each evening, Nori greeted him as if he had survived a long absence. She rose behind the baby gate in the kitchen, braced her paws against the mesh, and wagged so hard her back end nearly folded. Then she would remember the towel, seize it, and present it to him like evidence. He fed her, cleaned after her, followed Dr. Crane's instructions, updated Harper by message, watched the animal control listing appear online with the words Puppy, German Shepherd Mix, possible purebred, Karji van Ninch. No one called to claim her. That should not have felt like relief. On the 3rd morning, before his shift, Lowell stopped at Tinsley's Market because the clerk at the convenience store had mentioned an older woman there who fed anything with eyes and refused credit for it. The market sat wedged between a shuttered barber shop and a narrow alley, its front window hand-painted with prices for milk, canned soup, eggs, and rock salt. A bell rang above the door when Lowell stepped inside. Warm air carried the smell of coffee grounds, cardboard, oranges, and old wooden floors. Behind the counter stood Mabel Tinsley, 69 years old, and built like a person who had never waited for someone else to move a crate. Her silver hair was cut blunt at her jaw, and reading glasses hung from a cord around her neck. She wore a mint green cardigan under a checked apron, with a pencil tucked behind one ear. She looked at Lowell's jacket, then at his face. You hear about the window sticker, the expired fire extinguisher, or the fact that my nephew parks like he was raised by coyotes. None of those today. Good. I was prepared to deny too. Lowell placed the photographs on the counter. Mabel's humor left without drama. She picked up the photograph of the adult shepherd first, not the puppy. I know her, she said. Lowell felt his shoulders tighten. You've seen her recently? Most mornings when the street's still decent. Mabel reached beneath the counter and brought out a dented metal bowl. One side was bent inward, as if a truck tire had once kissed it and failed to finish the job. I put food behind the store before I unlock the front. She waits across the alley until I go back inside. Then she eats fast and leaves. How long? 3 weeks, maybe a little more. Did you call anyone? Mabel's eyes sharpened. I called the shelter. I called animal control. I even called my niece because she knows how to make me feel guilty in full sentences. By the time anyone came, the dog was gone. I wasn't accusing you. I know. She set the bowl down. I was answering the question you were polite enough not to ask. Lowell looked toward the rear of the store, where a narrow hallway led to a back door. Which way does she leave? East. Most days. Sometimes she circles first, like she doesn't want a straight line attached to her. Mabel tapped the photograph with one finger. She's careful. Not mean. Careful. Lowell showed her Nori's picture. For the first time, Mabel's face changed into something openly sad. Oh, she said, that one. You've seen her? No, but I wondered. Mabel took off her glasses, cleaned them on the edge of her apron, and did not put them back on right away. A mother doesn't eat like that for herself. Not with snow on the ground. Not with ribs starting to show and milk still pulling at her. I knew there were babies somewhere. I just couldn't find where she carried the food. The store bell rang as a customer came in for cigarettes and coffee. Mabel served him without hurrying, tucked a receipt into the register, and returned to Lowell as if the conversation had stayed exactly where she left it. I started calling her Mesa, she said, not to her face. She doesn't care what I call her. But she stands on the loading dock sometimes, high and still, like one of those flat-topped mountains out west, Looks lonely from a distance and larger when you get near. Lowell looked down at the photograph. Mesa. The name settled over the image so naturally that he did not question it. Mabel placed the metal bowl on the counter between them. Take that, if you think it helps. She knows the sound of it. Lowell did not reach for it at once. You may not get it back, Mabel snorted. Sergeant, I have lost more bowls to more causes than you have filed reports. Bring back the dog if you can. The bowl can find its own way. He took it then. That afternoon, after his shift, Lowell found the second true lead in the same store. He had returned to replace the photograph in Mabel's window with a clearer copy. The winter sun had faded the first one, and condensation had curled one corner. He was smoothing tape along the glass when the bell rang behind him and a woman came in, carrying a paper cup, a wet pair of gloves, and the cold smell of plowed streets. She was in her early 30s, strong through the shoulders, with brown skin, dark curls tucked under a gray knit cap, and a reflective orange jacket marked by streaks of salt. A thin scar crossed high on her right cheek, pale against the flush the cold had brought to her face. She stopped before reaching the coffee urn, her gaze fixed on Nori's photograph. I've seen that puppy, she said. Lowell turned. Mabel, behind the counter, lowered the can of beans she had been pricing. Juno, don't start a sentence like that unless you've got the rest of it. The woman gave Mabel a look that suggested this was not the first instruction she had received before coffee. I drive the east plow route before sunrise. Cargill, 9th, the nursery road, then past the storage units. Lowell stepped closer but stopped before crowding her. When did you see her? About a week ago. Maybe 6 days. Juno Price set her paper cup down, took a pen from the counter, and reached for the back of an old invoice without asking. The shepherd crossed behind the old glass nursery with 3 pups around her feet. One kept lagging. Little pale mark here. She tapped Nori's chest in the photograph, and the ear looked like a paper corner folded wrong. Lowell's hand tightened around the dented bowl. 3 puppies, he said. 3. Juno drew a rough map with quick, practical lines. Railroad, tire shop, storage buildings, rear alley, nursery fence. The morning after you found this one, assuming that's the same pup, I saw the adult again. Only 2 pups with her. Mabel made a small sound under her breath. Juno continued, her pen moving across the invoice. I don't take the plow close to the fence anymore. First time, the engine scared them bad. The mother moved the pups toward the greenhouse. After that, I cut wider and watched from the corner. Lowell saw it then, not as a mystery, but as a sequence of ordinary accidents. A loud plow, a train horn, a puppy that startled the wrong direction, a gate swinging in the wind, a small body ending up under a laundromat awning because the world had become too loud and too large. For 3 days, he had wondered why the mother had left Nori. Now the question changed. How hard had Mesa looked before she understood she still had 2 others to keep alive? Juno slid the map toward him. There's a break in the north fence, rusted out near the old potting shed. If she's denning anywhere, I'd check there. But that property's private. I know, Lowell said. Mabel raised an eyebrow. That sounded like a man reminding himself, not telling us. Lowell took out his phone and called Harper. She answered on the 4th ring, whined loud around her. Tell me you didn't follow the shepherd into a storm drain. I have a possible location. Old glass nursery off Rayner Road. Witness saw the adult with 3 puppies last week, 2 after Nori was found. North fence breach near the potting shed. There was a pause. He could hear Harper shifting the phone, maybe writing. Private property, she said. I know. Do you? Lowell closed his eyes briefly. I'm calling before going. Good. Stay there. Send me the map. I'll find the owner. It took Harper nearly an hour to track down the nursery owner, a man wintering in Arizona who seemed more concerned about broken glass than dogs, until Harper explained that puppies might be sheltering near his spring inventory area. He gave verbal permission for an exterior check and requested that no locks be cut, no structures damaged, and the main gate be latched afterward. By then, Lowell had gone home to get Nori. He told himself there were practical reasons. If the adult shepherd was there, Nori's scent might confirm the route. If the other puppies were near, Nori might react before humans saw them. Dr. Crane had not forbidden bringing her, only warned against exposing her to unknown animals without caution. But when Lowell lifted Nori from the kitchen pen, he knew the practical reasons were only half true. He wanted her with him because the idea of standing near that fence without her felt wrong. Snow began to fall just as he reached Rayner Road. Not hard, not the kind of storm that erased distance. It came down in fine, bright grains that caught in the headlights and drifted across the road like sifted flour. The old nursery stood beyond a row of leafless lilacs, its sign faded, its greenhouses dull under winter grime. Rows of empty tables sat beneath plastic sheeting. The main gate was chained but not locked. Harper had texted the code to the small padlock on the pedestrian entrance. Lowell did not open it yet. He stood outside the north fence with Nori tucked inside his coat, Mabel's dented bowl hanging from 2 fingers, Juno's map folded in his pocket. Beyond the chain link, the potting sheds crouched under snow. Old trays leaned against a wall. A torn tarp lifted and fell with the wind. Near the rusted break in the fence, paw prints crossed over one another in the thin new snow. Adult tracks. Small tracks, more than one set. Nori's body changed against him. She had been warm and restless a moment before, chewing gently at the edge of his zipper. Now she lifted her head. Her folded ear twitched. Her nose pointed toward the gap in the fence, and a sound came from her chest so soft Lowell almost missed it. Not a bark, not a whine. Recognition, maybe, if recognition could be small enough to fit inside a breath. Lowell stood very still outside the fence. For the first time since he found her beneath the laundromat awning, Nori was not looking at him for safety. She was looking past him, towards something she had lost. The next afternoon came clear after a night of thin snow. Merrow Falls looked scrubbed clean beneath the cold sun. Rooflines glittered. Bare branches held beads of ice along their lower edges. The plowed roads were wet and black, but the fields beyond town still lay white, broken only by fence posts and the pale smoke of chimneys. Lowell drove to the old nursery, with Nori secured in the laundry basket on the rear seat. She was not as restless as she had been on the way to the clinic. The closer they came to Rayner Road, the quieter she became. She stopped chewing the flannel sleeve, stood with both paws against the basket rim, and tested the air through the cracked window as if the world outside had begun speaking in a language she almost remembered. Harper's animal control truck was already parked near the service entrance when Lowell arrived. Dr. Crane's green station wagon sat behind it, its rear hatch open to reveal a folded blanket, a medical bag, a plastic tub of soft food, and towels arranged with the neatness of someone who expected every small thing to matter. Harper stood by the north fence, reading the ground rather than the gate. She wore her gray jacket under a reflective vest, the red leash hanging from one gloved hand. Dr. Crane was a few steps away, her parka hood down despite the cold, pale hair tucked at her collar, eyes moving over the property the way a physician might study a patient before touching them. "No fresh vehicle tracks," Harper said as Lowell approached. "Owner confirmed no staff have been here since last week. Gate unlocked for us. We enter quietly, stay near the fence, and do not rush anything." Harper looked at Nori's basket. "She stays under control." Lowell nodded. "I know." Dr. Crane came closer and glanced into the basket. Nori looked up at her, ears uneven, body tense. The veterinarian did not reach in. "She knows this place," Dr. Crane said. Lowell felt the words settle into him before he asked, "You can tell that already?" "I can tell she is not curious in the same way she was at the clinic." Dr. Crane watched Nori's nose work. "This is not new to her. That does not mean it feels safe." They opened the pedestrian gate without letting the chain scrape. The old nursery stretched ahead in rows of winter emptiness. Wooden tables stood bare where spring flowers would later sit in plastic trays. Stacks of terracotta pots leaned under a tarp. The greenhouses, long and low, were clouded with grime and frost, their glass panels turning the sun into a dull white glow. The place did not feel abandoned, not exactly. It felt paused. Lowell carried Nori as they followed the inside of the fence toward the north corner. He could hear the distant railroad, a faint clank and groan beyond the warehouse roofs. But here the snow held most sounds down. Every step seemed too loud. The dented metal bowl Mabel had given him hung from his left hand. He had wrapped the rim in cloth to keep it from ringing by accident. Near the rusted break in the fence, the paw prints were clearer than they had been the night before. The new snow had preserved them, one adult dog moving in repeated paths, smaller prints crossing and circling, then vanishing beneath a gap where the wire had curled outward from the post. Harper crouched without touching the ground. This is active. Lowell looked toward the nearest greenhouse. How close? Close enough that if we keep talking, she already knows we're here. As if summoned by the sentence, Mesa appeared. She stepped from behind a row of stacked wooden flats near the potting shed, silent and immediate. In daylight, Lowell could see more of her than he had outside the clinic. She was a German Shepherd female, young but worn thin by winter, her dark saddle pulled over her back like a shadow that had settled there. One ear carried the small nick Mabel's photograph had shown. Her amber eyes did not blink. She placed herself between them and the greenhouse door. Nori made a sound in the basket. Mesa's attention flicked toward it, then back to Lowell's hands. No growl came from her, no bark, nothing theatrical enough to make the situation simple. She stood with her weight forward, ribs moving under rough fur, ready to do whatever the next moment demanded. Lowell felt the old instinct rise, assess, close distance, secure, remove the vulnerable. Harper's voice was barely more than breath. Do not step toward her. I'm not. You are thinking about it. He was. That annoyed him because she was right. Dr. Crane lowered herself slowly until she was sitting on an overturned crate near the fence. She did not face Mesa directly. Lowell, put Nori down where you are. Keep the leash loose. Let the puppy decide whether to move. Lowell looked at the ground. The snow had melted in patches near the fence, leaving dark soil and wet gravel. He set the basket down, lifted Nori with both hands, and placed her gently on a dry strip beside his boot. A soft puppy harness held the thin black leash, the end looped loosely in Lowell's fingers. Nori did not run. She stood very small in the wide, bright silence, her head turned first toward Lowell, then toward Mesa. She took one step, stopped, and looked back again. Lowell forced his hand to remain open. The leash sagged between them. Mesa lowered her head. Nori moved forward. The distance between them was only 20 feet, then 15, then 10. Lowell could see the slight tremor in the puppy's legs, the way her nose searched through old scents and new fear. Mesa did not rush to meet her. She waited until Nori came close enough, then bent and touched her nose to the puppy's head. The contact was brief, too brief for the reunion Lowell had imagined. Mesa inhaled along Nori's ear, her shoulder, the pale drop of fur on her chest. Then she turned away. Lowell almost spoke. Dr. Crane lifted one hand without looking at him. Mesa walked toward the greenhouse, then stopped at the entrance and looked back. It was not a command a human could translate cleanly. But Nori understood enough to follow. The greenhouse door had been propped half open by a warped plank. Inside, the air looked white with old light. Lowell could see rows of empty nursery pots, a pile of burlap sacks, cracked trays, a coiled hose, and rubber mats pushed against the lower wall. The smell reached him even from outside: damp soil, plastic, cold metal, dog, and the faint sourness of food carried too far in a hungry mouth. Nori stepped over the threshold. A small head appeared from behind a row of pots, then another. The first puppy was darker than Nori, with a black mask too large for his narrow face and paws that seemed to belong to a future body. The second was a little lighter, quieter, with golden markings down both front legs. They froze when they saw Nori. Then all three puppies collided. They came together in a tangle of noses and paws, slipping on the concrete, bumping into pots, knocking over an empty tray that clattered once and made all three jump. The darker puppy recovered first and shoved his head beneath Nori's chin. The lighter one caught Nori's folded ear in her mouth. Nori wriggled between them, half startled and half frantic with recognition. Lowell's throat tightened so suddenly that he looked away. He had prepared himself for injury, hunger, absence. He had not prepared for joy that looked this clumsy. Mesa stood beside the greenhouse entrance, watching him instead of the puppies. That brought him back. She had allowed the reunion, not surrendered the boundary. Dr. Crane rose slowly and took 2 careful steps to improve her view. She did not cross the line Mesa had drawn with her body. "They're mobile," she said softly. "Alert, no obvious limping. Coats rough, but not critical. They have been fed." Harper scanned the greenhouse from where she stood. "Shelter spot is dry." Lowell saw it then. The arrangement Mesa had made out of whatever the abandoned nursery had offered. Rubber mats pulled into a shallow nest, a folded tarp blocking wind beneath a broken pane, bits of cardboard and burlap pressed along the wall, a torn paper food sack in one corner. Near it, a few dry kibbles scattered like evidence of Mabel's bowl having traveled farther than anyone knew. "She carried food back here," Lowell said. Dr. Crane nodded. "Likely. Ate what she needed, brought what she could. Some mothers will regurgitate for pups this age, too. At 6 or 7 weeks, they can manage soft food, but they still need protection." The darker puppy grabbed Nori's harness strap and pulled. Nori tried to turn, tripped over a pot saucer, and rolled against the lighter puppy. For a moment, they were only babies in a patch of sun. Then a truck down the road hit a pothole. The sound cracked across the nursery. Mesa moved before the puppies finished flinching. She stepped into the greenhouse, putting herself between the entrance and the 3 small bodies, her head lowered, her tail steady, her eyes fixed on Lowell. Nori retreated with the other 2. Lowell felt the leash tighten in his hand, not much, just enough to remind him that he could pull. The knowledge made him ashamed before he did anything with it. He could lift Nori, he could step in, he could tell himself the other 2 needed help now, not tomorrow. He could turn a rescue into a seizure and call the difference urgency. Instead, he opened his hand. The leash slipped free, falling onto the damp gravel at his feet. Nori disappeared behind Mesa with the others. Lowell stood outside the greenhouse with an empty hand. It should have felt like losing control. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he had done since arriving. Harper looked at him but said nothing. Dr. Crane's voice was low. That was the right choice. Lowell did not trust himself to answer. They remained that way for several minutes. Mesa stood guard. The puppies slowly resumed moving around one another, though they stayed farther back now. The lighter female nosed through an old burlap fold. The darker male tried to climb over Nori and failed. Nori looked once toward Lowell from the shadow beside the mats, then turned when her littermate bumped her shoulder. Lowell had brought her here to find the truth. Now the truth had teeth, breath, siblings, and a mother standing between him and the idea of taking her home. Harper walked the perimeter from a distance and returned with a frown. "Owner said deliveries start next week? Spring stock in a few days," Lowell said. "Soil first, then plants. Trucks will use the south gate and come right past the sheds." Harper nodded toward the greenhouse. "If she bolts with them once that starts, we may not find the pups before nightfall." Dr. Crane studied the cracked panels above the shelter area, and if they hide deeper, there are fertilizers, sharp trays, old wiring, cold storage. This place is acceptable for a few days only because Mesa made it so. It is not safe long term. Lowell turned toward her. "Then we take them." Mesa's head lifted at the sound of his voice. Harper did not soften the answer. "No." He looked at her. "No," she repeated, "not by rushing in. Not while she is this defensive and the pups can scatter into a structure with broken glass. You go in wrong, she may bite. Worse, she may move them tonight. We know where they are now." "And she knows that we know," Harper said, "which means she is already deciding whether this place is still safe." Lowell hated the logic of it. Dr. Crane stepped closer to him, just enough that she could speak without carrying her voice. "You are thinking like a man who has 1 puppy in his house." He looked toward the greenhouse. "I am thinking like a man looking at 3 puppies in a building that opens in days." "No," she said gently. "You are thinking like a man who wants the fear to end because he has seen enough of it." That struck more accurately than he wanted. Inside the greenhouse, Nori was chewing the edge of a rubber mat while the darker puppy tried to take it from her. Mesa glanced back once, corrected them with the smallest movement of her muzzle, and returned her attention to the humans. Harper outlined the plan before Lowell could argue again. Food and water would be placed near the greenhouse, then gradually closer to a crate. No chasing, no crowding, no curious neighbors. Lowell could help because Mesa had already seen him with Nori, but help meant consistency, not command. Dr. Crane would monitor from a distance and intervene only if a puppy appeared ill or injured. Harper would secure humane equipment and keep the owner updated. "How long?" Lowell asked. "As long as we can take without losing them," Harper said, and as short as Mesa allows. That was not an answer that fit any form. They set down the first food and water before leaving. Dr. Crane mixed soft food into shallow bowls, while Harper placed them at a distance Mesa could accept. Lowell set Mabel's dented metal bowl near the outer edge of the greenhouse path and unwrapped the cloth from its rim. When the bowl touched the ground, the soft metallic sound carried through the still air. Mesa's ears changed, not forward, not back, something in between. Recognition. For the first time since they arrived, her eyes left Lowell's hands and moved to the bowl. Mabel had been here without entering. Her patience had traveled in a dented piece of metal, in food left behind a market before sunrise, in the simple refusal to make kindness depend on being seen. Lowell understood then that he was not beginning a rescue. He was joining one already underway. They backed toward the fence one by one. Harper went first, then Dr. Crane. Lowell remained a moment longer, because moving away from Nori went against every new instinct the last few days had given him. "Nori," he said softly. The puppy lifted her head. For a second, she ran toward him. Lowell's heart answered before he could stop it. Nori reached the greenhouse entrance, stopped beside Mesa's foreleg, and looked back at the two puppies behind her. The darker one had followed halfway. The lighter one stood near the mats, watching. Mesa did not block Nori. She did not nudge her forward or pull her back. The choice, small as it was, belonged to the puppy. Nori took 2 more steps toward Lowell, close enough that he could see the damp soil on her paws. Then she turned around and trotted back to her littermates. Lowell stood with the leash hanging loose in his hand. Harper waited by the gate. "Sergeant," he nodded once. Leaving the nursery felt heavier than arriving. At the fence, he looked back. Mesa had not moved toward the food yet. She stood beside the greenhouse door, tall in the cold light, guarding the 3 small shapes behind her. Nori sat between the other 2 puppies and looked through the glass-bright doorway. Lowell raised one hand, then let it fall before the gesture became a promise he could not keep that day. He stepped through the gate and latched it carefully behind him. The drive home was the first time in days that the laundry basket was empty. The flannel shirt lay folded inside it, untouched. At a red light near the railroad crossing, Lowell reached back without thinking, then stopped when his hand found only fabric. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the porch light had come on automatically, illuminating the shoveled path, the quiet kitchen window, and the door of a house that had learned Nori's name before it learned how to let her go. Lowell sat in the truck until the heater clicked off. For the first time, loving the puppy meant leaving her where she was. The plan looked simple when Harper wrote it down. 3 shallow bowls, 2 water containers, 1 large transport crate with the door tied open, 1 smaller puppy crate kept out of sight until later. No chasing, no sudden approach, no neighbors at the fence, no food left where it would draw raccoons after dark. No attempt to touch Mesa unless Dr. Crane decided a medical emergency outweighed the risk. Lowell stood in his kitchen that first morning, reading the list while coffee cooled beside his hand. The house felt wrong without Nori. Her towel still lay near the stove, washed and folded now, though one corner remained permanently frayed. The laundry basket sat by the back door with the old flannel inside. Lowell had left it there because he intended to use it again, but each time he passed, he looked into the empty basket before he could stop himself. At 8, Harper arrived with the large crate in the back of her truck. It was heavy, metal-framed, and too practical to look hopeful. Bram came with her because Lowell had asked for help moving it, though Bram acted as if he had only come to prevent a public safety disaster involving one stubborn sergeant and a crate door. "You know," Bram said, gripping one side, "most people spend their days off fishing." Lowell lifted the other end. "It's February. Indoor hobbies exist." Harper watched them angle the crate into Lowell's truck bed. "If you two are finished performing masculinity, don't drop my equipment." Bram gave her a wounded look. "This is interagency cooperation. This is you blocking my mirror." Dr. Crane met them at the nursery with food already mixed in sealed containers. Mabel had sent 2 bags of towels, each one folded with unnecessary care and labeled in black marker. Clean old, still useful. Juno texted the plow schedule before dawn, along with a note saying she would avoid Rayner Road unless the town supervisor forced her hand. Lowell read the message twice. For days he had thought of the rescue as something he was trying to do. Now it had edges made of other people's hands. At the nursery, Mesa watched from the greenhouse doorway while they placed the first food near the path and backed away. She did not move until everyone had returned beyond the fence. Even then, she waited long enough that Lowell wondered whether she would let the food freeze rather than approach it. At last, she crossed the concrete. She ate quickly, head lifting between mouthfuls. Behind her, the 3 puppies stirred in the shelter of the mats. Nori was easy to pick out because she did not stay hidden as long as the others. She came to the doorway, saw Lowell by the fence, and bounced once on her front paws. Lowell did not call her. That was the hardest part of the morning. He had spent years training dogs to listen for his voice. Now he had to prove his care by withholding it. On the second day, Lowell came alone for the first feeding. Harper had approved it, with rules repeated firmly enough that they followed him into the truck. "Stay outside the line," Mesa has accepted. "Put food down, sit, do not stare. If she withdraws the pups, leave." The sky was duller that day, the sun hidden behind a pale sheet of cloud. The nursery looked less beautiful without light catching the glass. It looked like what it was, a cold property waiting to become useful again. Lowell set the bowls near the same spot. Mesa stood under the greenhouse awning, stiff, alert, tired. Nori came out behind her and gave a small chirping sound that pulled at him with almost physical force. Lowell lowered himself onto an overturned wooden crate 10 yards away. Mesa did not come to the food. Nori ran 2 steps toward him. Mesa shifted one paw. Nori stopped. Lowell stared at the ground between his boots and made his hands stay open on his knees. "I'm not taking her," he said, though he did not know whether he was speaking to Mesa or to himself. The wind moved over the old plastic sheeting. Somewhere behind him, a loose chain tapped softly against a gatepost. Minutes passed. His toes began to go cold inside his boots. Finally, Mesa came forward. Not all the way, not comfortably. She approached the food with a path that kept her body angled toward the puppies, ready to pivot back at the first wrong movement. She took one mouthful, then another. Lowell did not lift his head. A strange thought came to him as he sat there in the cold. This was not rescue yet. This was apology. Not for something he had done, maybe. Not personally, but for the hands that had thrown things, the engines that had chased, the voices that had shouted, the doors that had closed. Mesa did not know the difference between one human and another until someone gave her enough repeated evidence to learn it. Lowell had worn a badge long enough to know people were not so different. Trust could be damaged by one man and rebuilt by another who had no right to ask why it took so long. The third day brought Bram back. He arrived with a battery lantern, 2 extra bungee cords, and a brown work jacket instead of his uniform coat. He tried to make a joke when he stepped through the gate, but it died before becoming words. Mesa had placed herself along the windward side of the puppies. The morning air was sharp, and a fine snow moved sideways through the nursery rows. The greenhouse blocked some of it, but a gap in the plastic sheeting let wind curl under the awning. Mesa lay with her body curved around the 3 puppies, taking the draft across her own back while Nori and the other 2 slept against the wall. Bram stopped beside Lowell. For once his face held no grin. "She's been doing that all night?" he asked. "Probably." Bram looked at the towels in his arms, then at Mesa. "I thought she was just being difficult." Lowell kept his voice low. "She is being exact." That seemed to land harder than correction would have. Bram spent the next hour patching the gap in the plastic from the outside, moving slowly under Harper's instructions. He did not go near Mesa. He did not speak to her in the high, careless voice people sometimes used when they wanted an animal to absolve them quickly. He only worked, then backed away. Before leaving, he placed the battery lantern where Dr. Crane had marked the night before, angled away from the dogs so it would not shine into their eyes. "Text me if you need the fence watched," he said. Lowell glanced at him. Bram shrugged. People like to turn every sad thing into something to stand around and look at. By afternoon, that proved true. A pickup slowed near the road. Then a woman with a phone walked along the outside fence after seeing Lowell's truck. Bram intercepted both with a politeness so thin it might as well have been a barricade. "No photos," he told one man. "No calling them, no tossing food. No, sir, she does not need to know you're good with dogs." Lowell heard him from inside the fence and almost smiled. Mesa ate while Lowell remained seated that evening. Not after he left, not after he climbed into the truck, while he was still there. It was only 3 bites at first. Then she lifted her head, judged him, and took 3 more. Nori tumbled out of the greenhouse with the darker male latched onto the back of her harness. The lighter female followed more carefully, stepping around a pot shard as if she had already learned the world contained traps. Nori reached Lowell's boot, smelled the toe, and placed one paw on it. Lowell's chest tightened. He did not touch her. The darker male came next. He moved in a zigzag, brave only because Nori was between him and danger. He stretched his neck toward Lowell's boot, sniffed once, startled at the smell of leather, and scrambled backward so fast he sat down on his own tail. Bram made a sound behind the fence that he turned into a cough. The puppy recovered, shook himself, and attacked a leaf. Dr. Crane, who had arrived for the evening check, watched from beside the gate. "That one will need supervision and possibly a personal attorney." "The little female?" Harper asked. "No, the male. The female is the one already taking notes." Lowell looked toward the quieter puppy. She stood half in shadow, watching Nori, Mesa, Lowell, the bowls, and the exit. Nothing about her seemed timid. She was simply gathering the room before she entered it. Nori leaned against Lowell's boot. He let his hand lower an inch. Mesa's head came up. Lowell stopped. The old Lowell would have taken the inch anyway. He would have judged the risk acceptable, the dog's concern unnecessary, the moment too close to waste. Now he lifted his hand back to his knee. Mesa held his gaze. Then, very slowly, she lowered her head to the bowl again. The next morning they introduced the crate. Harper carried it inside with Lowell while Bram held the gate, and Dr. Crane stood where she could see Mesa's full body. They placed the crate several feet from the greenhouse entrance, not blocking the path, not claiming the shelter. The door was tied open with 2 cords so it could not swing shut. A towel from Mabel lined the floor. Food stayed outside. Mesa watched every movement. Her body did not tremble, but tension traveled along her spine. The puppies, on the other hand, treated the new object as a civic festival. Nori entered first, seized one corner of the towel, and backed out with it clenched in her teeth. The dark male pounced on the other corner. The lighter female placed both front paws inside the crate, sniffed once, and withdrew as if filing the information for later. Lowell stood with the food container in his hand and did not laugh, though he wanted to. Nori dragged the towel across the concrete. The dark male lost his grip and rolled into an empty pot. The lighter female took advantage of the chaos to step fully into the crate and inspect the back wall. Mesa did not move. For the rest of that day, the crate remained part of the landscape. Nothing closed, nothing trapped. Food appeared near it and vanished when Mesa permitted herself to eat. Water stayed close enough to be useful and far enough not to corner her. Lowell sat in his place beneath the wooden overhang until cold climbed through his jeans and into his bones. On the 5th day, Harper approved moving the food just inside the crate. "Not deep," she said, half a step. Let her keep her back feet out if she wants. Lowell nodded. Mesa circled the crate twice before approaching. The puppies were already inside, climbing over the towel Nori had failed to steal that morning. The darker male chewed the edge. The lighter female sat near the back like a small judge. Nori looked out at Lowell, ears uneven, mouth open in a silent puppy grin. Mesa put her head into the crate. Only her head. She ate 2 mouthfuls, backed out, checked the greenhouse, checked Lowell, checked the fence, and returned to the puppies. No one moved. The afternoon lengthened. Shadows of the greenhouse ribs stretched over the concrete. The winter sun softened behind clouds, and the old glass turned gray. Lowell thought they were finished for the day. Then Mesa came back. She approached the crate without circling this time. Her front paws stepped onto the towel. Her shoulders followed. For one full breath, she stood inside. Lowell felt Harper shift beside him, but she said nothing. Mesa lowered her nose to the metal floor under the towel. She smelled the corners, the door frame, the tied-open hinge. Her eyes found Lowell. His hand was close enough to the door that he could have reached it in 2 steps. The thought crossed his mind with a force that embarrassed him. 2 steps, 1 quiet movement, the latch, the end of waiting. The end of fear, the beginning of whatever came next. Mesa remained inside, watching him. Lowell stood, slowly because every motion now had meaning. Harper's shoulders tightened, but she did not stop him. Dr. Crane watched his hands. Bram, outside the fence, went still. Lowell crossed only half the distance. Mesa did not retreat. He stopped beside the crate, far enough that the door remained untouched. Then he crouched and placed 1 more piece of softened food on the ground outside the threshold. Not inside, outside. Mesa stared at it, then at him. Lowell rose and stepped back. After several seconds, Mesa came out of the crate to take the food. The door stayed open behind her. That was the point. Not the crate, not the food, not even the plan. The point was the open door. Lowell looked at Mesa, at Nori pressed between the 2 littermates, at the towel carrying the sense of Mabel's store, his kitchen, the clinic, the nursery, and all the hands that had chosen not to rush. For the first time, Mesa had entered a human-made cage and found that it did not close. She returned to the greenhouse with her puppies before dusk. Lowell gathered the empty bowls but left the crate exactly where it was. Door tied open, towel inside, waiting without demand. As he latched the gate behind him, Bram came to stand beside the truck. "You could shut it," Bram said. Lowell looked back through the fence. Mesa stood at the greenhouse entrance, framed by dull winter glass, the puppies moving around her legs. "Yes," Lowell said. Bram was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you?" Lowell placed Mabel's dented bowl in the truck bed, careful not to let it ring. "Because tomorrow she needs to believe today." Snow fell thick on the 6th morning, but the air held still. It came down in large, deliberate flakes that softened the nursery roofs and settled along the fence wires without blowing sideways. The world looked quieter than it was. Under the fresh white, Lowell could still see the dark patches of thawing ground where they had walked the same careful paths for days. He arrived before Harper, before Dr. Crane, before Bram. For a few minutes, he stood alone outside the north fence with his gloved hands resting on the top rail. The greenhouse waited in pale light. The large crate sat where they had left it, door tied open, towel inside, no longer a strange object, but not yet a safe one. Beyond it, Mesa stood beneath the awning, her body half turned toward the puppies sleeping in the shelter of the rubber mats. Nori lifted her head first. Even from the fence, Lowell could tell it was her by the uneven ears. She saw him and rose, placing 1 paw over the darker male puppy's shoulder as she climbed out of the warm pile. The movement woke the other 2. Within seconds, all 3 were stumbling around Mesa's legs, bumping into one another with the careless confidence they had earned only because their mother had spent so many nights not sleeping. Lowell wanted the sight to be enough. It was not. His phone buzzed in his pocket. The message was from Harper. Owner just called. Delivery trucks now scheduled for day after tomorrow. Soil pallets and greenhouse tables. We try today if she gives us the opening. Lowell read the message twice, though the meaning was clear the first time. Time had become a wall behind them. He heard Harper's truck before he saw it. She parked near the service gate and got out with her red leash looped over one shoulder, a smaller puppy crate in one hand, and a folded dark towel under her arm. Dr. Crane arrived moments later with her medical bag and a plastic tub of softened food. Bram came last, driving his own pickup, wearing the brown work jacket Lottie had once tried to drag from the fence. He did not make a joke when he stepped out. That, more than anything, told Lowell how much the morning had changed. Harper gathered them near the gate, speaking in a low voice that did not carry toward the greenhouse. We do not rush the first good sign. We do not celebrate. We do not crowd. Puppies first in the smaller crate. Mesa last in the large one if she chooses to enter. Lowell handles the big door because she's watched him the most. I'll handle the puppy crate. Dr. Crane stays clear unless someone panics or looks medically wrong. Bram, you keep the road quiet. Bram nodded. No audience. No audience, Harper repeated. Dr. Crane looked toward Lowell. If she backs out, we let her. A failed calm attempt is better than a successful betrayal. Lowell understood the sentence. He also hated it. Inside the fence, they moved like people in a room where someone was sleeping. No wasted noise, no quick turns. Harper placed the smaller crate near the path, but did not bring it too close at first. Dr. Crane mixed food into pea-sized portions and laid a broken line toward the open door. Nori noticed first. Of course she did. She came trotting out from beneath the awning with her head low and tail lifted, following the scent of the food with solemn concentration. The darker male tumbled after her, stepping on the line twice before realizing the food was under his own paws. The lighter female waited near Mesa, watching the entire operation before deciding whether it deserved participation. Lowell stood several yards away, shoulders loose, eyes lowered. Nori reached the crate door, looked at Lowell, and made a small, uncertain sound. It was not fear exactly, more like a question she expected him to answer. He did not call her. He did not tell her good girl. He only breathed, slow and even, and let Harper's quiet work continue. Nori stepped inside the smaller crate. The dark male shoved in behind her, immediately trying to claim the towel. The lighter female entered last, not hurried, pausing at the threshold long enough to look back at Mesa. Then she ducked inside and took the piece of food Nori had missed. Harper waited until all three puppies were fully in. The small crate door moved. Nori lifted her head. The dark male complained first, a thin, offended squeak, then forgot his outrage when his teeth found the towel edge. The lighter female sat in the back, watching through the bars. Harper latched the door without drama and placed the towel over one side, leaving the front open. Mesa stiffened. Lowell felt it before anyone spoke. Every line of the shepherd's body changed. Her ears sharpened. Her weight shifted forward. Her eyes fixed on the small crate that held her puppies. Harper stepped back immediately. No one reached toward Mesa. No one blocked her line of sight. Dr. Crane's hand rested near her medical bag but did not open it. The puppies moved inside the crate, alive, close, noisy. Mesa took one step, then another. She went to the smaller crate first, not the food. She smelled the bars, the door, the towel, each puppy she could reach. Nori pressed her nose through the front. Mesa touched it once. Only then did Mesa turn toward the large crate. The food had been placed deeper inside than before. Not so deep that she would have to enter blindly, but far enough that her shoulders would cross the threshold. The door was still tied open. Lowell stood beside it. Not touching the metal, his hands visible and empty. Mesa circled once. Snow slipped from the greenhouse frame behind her and landed with a soft collapse. She flinched, then recovered. Lowell did not move. Mesa stepped into the crate. Her front paws went first, then her shoulders. She lowered her head and ate one mouthful, slower than she had on the earlier days. The puppies rustled in the smaller crate. She lifted her head and looked toward them. They were still there. She ate again. Lowell remembered another door then. Not a crate door. A cruiser door, years earlier, thrown open under hard winter lights. His old K9 partner had leapt out before Lowell could stop him, all training and trust and momentum. Answering a command Lowell had given because procedure said move, because seconds mattered, because hesitation could cost lives. The memory did not come as it usually did, sharp and punishing. It came quietly, through the shape of his hand near the crate. For years, Lowell had treated every new attachment as a door that could slam shut on him. He had kept rooms empty, kept conversations brief, kept softness filed under risk. He had told himself that discipline was the same as healing. Nori had walked into his kitchen and proven otherwise. Mesa had walked into a crate and made him understand something harder. Trust was not only what someone gave him. Sometimes trust was what he had to give back, even when the moment frightened him. Mesa looked at him. Lowell placed his hand on the crate door, not closing it, not yet. The shepherd's eyes followed the movement. Her body shifted backward, but she did not bolt. Her hind paws remained inside the crate. Lowell waited until her breath steadied. Then he loosened the tie. The door moved an inch. Mesa froze. Lowell stopped. The world seemed to narrow around the small sound of the puppies chewing the towel, Harper's boots in the snow, Bram somewhere by the road telling a truck to keep moving, Dr. Crane breathing softly through her nose. Lowell moved the door another inch. Mesa stepped back until her hip touched the rear wall. Her eyes did not leave his face. "Easy," he said, so low the word barely became sound. The door crossed the opening. The latch met the frame with a small metal click. No cheer rose from the humans. No one clapped. No one said finally. No one turned relief into noise. Mesa stood inside the crate, head high, chest moving. Lowell kept his hand on the frame, not on the bars, not reaching in, only present. Harper came forward with the towel and covered the upper half of the crate, leaving the front clear so Mesa could see her puppies. Dr. Crane moved close enough to observe Mesa's breathing, gums, posture, and eyes. "She's stressed," the veterinarian said quietly, but stable. Harper nodded once. "Puppies?" The smaller crate answered with 3 different levels of indignation. Bram appeared near the gate, cheeks red from the cold. "Roads clear." One guy wanted to know if this was for the paper. I told him it was for minding his business. Harper did not smile, but her shoulders lowered. Mabel arrived just as they were preparing the crates for transport. She had not been invited, but no one seemed surprised to see her. She stood outside the fence in her cream coat and red scarf, one hand on the chain link, the other holding the dented bowl she had insisted on retrieving only after Mesa no longer needed it. When Lowell passed with one end of the large crate, Mabel wiped under one eye with her mitten. "I'm not crying," she said. "Bram." Carrying the smaller crate with Harper answered, "No one said you were." "Good. Then remember that." They loaded the crates into Lowell's truck because Mesa already knew his vehicle, his scent, and his silence. Harper secured each tie-down. Dr. Crane checked ventilation and made Lowell repeat the route home, the garage setup, and the emergency signs that would require immediate return to the clinic. "Short drive," she said. "No stops. Keep the heater moderate. Do not open the crates until the garage is closed and the pen is secure." "Yes, doctor." "She means it," Harper added. "I know." Lowell drove home with both hands on the wheel. Behind him, the puppies made small shifting sounds. Once Nori squeaked, and Mesa responded with a low rumble that was not a growl but a mother's answer through metal bars. After that, the smaller crate settled. The garage had never been so ready for anything. Bram had helped clear it the night before, moving tools, antifreeze, paint cans, cords, and anything chewable or poisonous into locked cabinets or the shed. Rubber mats covered the floor. A puppy pen stood along the interior wall, large enough for movement, but not wide enough for chaos to become danger. Fresh water waited near the door to the fenced yard. A bed for Mesa had been placed in the quietest corner, where she could see the whole space without standing. Lowell pulled in, closed the garage door, and sat for one breath before getting out. The first sound inside the garage was not barking. It was the furnace kicking on from the wall unit Bram had installed that morning, filling the space with a low, steady warmth. They opened Mesa's crate from behind the secured pen. Lowell stepped back before the door swung wide. Mesa did not rush out. She smelled the air first, then the threshold, then the rubber mat. At last, she stepped into the garage. She inspected everything: water, corners, door, yard entrance, Lowell, Harper, Dr. Crane. The smaller crate. Only when Mesa returned to the bed area did Harper open the puppy crate. Nori burst out first, then collided with the dark male. The lighter female climbed over both of them with surprising dignity and went straight to the water bowl. Within seconds, the garage filled with the slap of paws, the clink of a bowl, the thud of a towel being dragged into battle. Lowell stood outside the pen with his hands hanging at his sides. He had imagined Nori running to him. For one foolish moment he had allowed himself that picture, the puppy remembering his kitchen, his boots, his voice. Instead, Nori ran a crooked circle around the pen, touched noses with Mesa, then collapsed between her littermates and began chewing the same towel from two directions at once. The disappointment came, small, human, embarrassing. Then Mesa lowered herself beside them. She did not sleep immediately. She watched Lowell, watched the door, watched her puppies, but after a while her head sank to her paws. Her eyes stayed open a little longer, then they closed. Lowell sat down on the garage floor outside the pen. No one told him he had done well. No one needed to. The proof was not in praise. It was in the sound of 4 dogs breathing in a warm place where the doors were closed against the cold, not against them. Nori shifted in her sleep and pressed closer to the other 2 puppies. Lowell thought it would hurt more that she had not chosen his boot. Instead, looking at Mesa finally resting beside all 3 of her young, he understood something with a tenderness that nearly undid him. This was what he had been trying to give Nori from the beginning. Not himself. Home enough to stop searching. 2 weeks changed the sound of Lowell's house. The garage no longer echoed when the furnace clicked on. Rubber mats covered the concrete. Towels hung from a line Bram had strung between 2 shelving units. A whiteboard near the interior door listed feeding times, weights, stool notes, clinic reminders, and the kind of instructions Lowell had once associated with police briefings, not puppies. Nori, curious, eats fast, chews everything, dark male, underfoot, loud sleeper, quiet female, watches first, steals later. Mesa, eating well, still guards doorway, improving. The first few days had been all movement. Bowls slid, paws skidded. The puppies discovered the pen gates, then discovered that discovering them did not mean getting past them. Nori still looked for Lowell when he came in, but not with the same desperate need she had shown that first night. She ran to him, touched his boot, then rushed back to the others as if the greeting were only one part of a larger schedule. Mesa changed more slowly. At first she slept with her eyes open and her body angled between Lowell and the puppies. If he stepped too close to the water bowl while they were drinking, she rose without a sound. If he opened the door to the fenced yard, she inspected the threshold before letting the puppies near it. She did not growl. She did not bare her teeth. She simply made herself a wall. Lowell respected the wall. Dr. Crane visited every 3rd day, her green notebook filling with numbers and brief remarks. Mesa's ribs became less sharp beneath her coat. The puppies gained weight. Their eyes stayed clear, their paws steadied. The first vaccinations were scheduled according to age and condition. Harper kept the animal control listing active, updated the photographs, and checked every call that came in. Most were nothing. Someone had seen a shepherd last summer. Someone else wanted to know if the puppies were free. One man insisted Mesa looked like a dog his cousin had owned in another county, until Harper asked for records and the man stopped replying. No one came with proof. No one came with a collar, a photograph, a vet bill, a name Mesa recognized, or the kind of grief that belonged to someone who had been searching day and night. That absence brought Lowell a relief he did not like admitting. It also brought him sadness. 4 living creatures had been out there long enough for a grocery store owner to start leaving food before dawn, long enough for a plow driver to adjust her route, long enough for a mother dog to learn which humans stood too close and which doors might trap her. They had belonged to someone once, perhaps. Or perhaps they had only belonged to a gap in the world where responsibility had failed to attach itself to a face. Mabel came by on the 5th evening with 2 paper bags and a speech prepared. I am not naming them, she said, as Lowell opened the garage door. The darker male immediately ran into the side of her boot, sat down, and sneezed. Mabel looked at him over the top of her glasses. Especially not that one. He's the loud sleeper, Lowell said. He is a menace with paws. The puppy grabbed the cuff of her pants and pulled as if helping her enter. Mabel stood very still. Then, against every rule she had brought with her, she said, "Tuck, let go." Lowell looked at her. Mabel pointed at him. "No. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it in uniform. I'm not in uniform. Worse, then it was personal." The quieter female emerged from behind Mesa's bed, carrying one corner of a towel twice her size. She dragged it with calm determination toward Mabel's grocery bags. Mabel watched her for 3 seconds. "That one is Lottie," she said. Lowell leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Still not naming them?" "I said I wasn't naming them. I did not say the names weren't obvious." After that, the whiteboard changed. Tuck eats everything, gets stuck under shelf. Lottie observes first, steals towels. Names made them easier to call. They also made the future harder to avoid. Lowell tried for a while to build a future that kept all 4 dogs inside the borders of his own life. He measured the yard. He priced fencing upgrades. He read training schedules for German Shepherd puppies. He calculated food, vaccinations, licensing, spay appointments, obedience classes, future exercise needs, emergency costs. He told himself that police work had taught him stamina. He told himself that structure could solve almost anything. Then one night, near the end of the stray hold, he came home after a 12-hour shift to find Bram kneeling in the garage while Tuck chewed one of his bootlesses. Lottie slept on his brown work jacket, and Nori tried to pull the same jacket out from under her. Mesa lay in the corner, not frightened but tired, not physically exhausted in the old desperate way, tired of being needed by 3 young bodies that no longer needed her every second. She had begun taking herself to the far side of the pen when the puppies played too hard. She slept deeper when they were not climbing over her. She watched the yard more than the door. Dr. Crane had told Lowell it was healthy. Lowell had not wanted to understand why. That night, Bram freed his bootlace and looked at the puppies crowding his knees. "You still thinking of keeping all of them?" Lowell did not answer quickly enough. Bram scratched Lottie behind one ear. She leaned into his hand, then immediately tried to drag his jacket farther under the bench. "My wife asked about the quiet one," Bram said. Lowell looked at him. Bram kept his eyes on the puppy. "Anna." She saw the picture Mabel posted for the shelter page. Said Lottie had the face of someone pretending not to be trouble. "She's not ready to go." "I know." Bram's voice was softer than usual. "I didn't say tomorrow." The garage felt warm around them, almost too warm. Lowell looked at Mesa. She had lowered her head, but her eyes were still open. Nori slept pressed against Tuck, her pale chest mark half hidden. Lottie rested on Bram's jacket as if she had already found a country and planted a flag. Lowell realized then that keeping them all would not preserve the rescue. It might only make his house another place where love had too little room to become what each of them needed. The official hold ended 3 days later. Harper came to the house with paperwork, adoption applications, and a gentleness that looked strange on her until Lowell understood it was not new. She simply wore it under practicality most of the time. "No owner claims verified," she said. "Legally, they can be placed after medical clearance and approval." Placed. The word was clean and cruel. Mabel took Tuck first, though she continued to describe the arrangement as temporary until Harper placed the adoption form in front of her. "I own a grocery store," Mabel muttered. "I do not own chaos." Tuck climbed into the reusable shopping bag she had brought for towels and got stuck halfway. Harper raised an eyebrow. Mabel signed. Bram returned with Anna Ellis, a woman Lowell had only met twice at department picnics. She was small, dark-haired, and steadier than Bram by several degrees, with the calm eyes of someone who had long ago learned to let him talk until he became honest. She sat on the garage floor without reaching. Lottie came to investigate her shoelace, then carried it 3 inches away as if filing a claim. Anna smiled. "That one." Bram looked relieved and doomed at the same time. Mace's placement took longer. Harper introduced the Whitakers on a gray Saturday afternoon. Calvin Whitaker was a tall, silver-haired man with a woodworker's hands and a quiet way of standing that made him seem less like a visitor than part of the room. His wife, Della, wore a soft gray scarf and carried no treats, no toys, no expectation. She brought a folded blanket and set it on the floor several feet away from Mace's bed. Then she sat beside it and talked to no one in particular about the weather. Mesa watched. The first visit ended with no contact. The second ended with Mesa smelling the blanket after the Whitakers left. On the third, Della sat by the garage window where winter light fell across the floor. Mesa circled once, checked the puppies, checked Lowell, and then lay down with her chin resting on the edge of Della's blanket. Calvin looked at Harper. "We can come again," he said, "as many times as she needs." Mesa closed her eyes. Lowell had thought the hardest part would be watching someone choose Mesa. It was harder to watch Mesa choose back. When the morning came for her to leave, the snow had begun to thin along the fence line. Meltwater ran in bright threads at the edge of the driveway. Lowell placed the blanket from the garage into the Whitakers' crate himself. Mesa smelled it, then looked toward the pen where the puppies were arguing over a toy rope. She went to each of them. Nori first, then Tuck, visiting for the morning because Mabel claimed he needed to say goodbye to his accomplices. Then Lottie, who had arrived in Bram's arms wearing a new blue collar and an expression of deep patience with mankind. Mesa touched each head. Then she stepped into the crate without being lifted. Lowell stood beside the open vehicle door, his black watch cold against his wrist. He wanted to say something large enough for what she had done. Survived, carried food, guarded a broken greenhouse, trusted a man just enough to let him close a door. All he managed was, "You did good." Mesa looked through the crate bars. For once, she did not seem to be watching for danger. The Whitakers drove away slowly. Nori stood at Lowell's leg until the vehicle turned the corner. Then she seized the loose cord on his glove and pulled. Life, Lowell was learning, did not pause long for grief. It tugged. It demanded breakfast. It stole gloves from people trying to feel solemn. By early spring, the 4 dogs had become a map of the town. Tuck lived behind Tinsley's Market, where Mabel had installed a low gate and discovered that puppy-proof was an optimistic phrase invented by people who had never met Tuck. Lottie lived with Bram and Anna, slept on the brown work jacket whenever possible, and attended obedience class with the grave seriousness of a judge hearing testimony. Mesa settled at the Whitakers' place outside town, where a fenced yard opened onto quiet fields and no one rushed her through a doorway. Nori belonged to Lowell. The adoption form said so. Her tag said so. The small navy collar Harper had approved said so. But Lowell no longer thought belonging meant what he once had. On the first Sunday when the snow pulled back from Mabel's fence, Lowell drove Nori to the market after breakfast. The yard behind the store smelled of wet boards, thawing earth, and the coffee Mabel had brought outside in a chipped mug. Tuck exploded from the back step and crashed into Nori with complete joy. Lottie arrived a few minutes later with Bram and Anna, entering more politely before stealing the ball Tuck had abandoned. For a while, the 3 puppies became a blur of paws and tails in the melting snow. Lowell stood beside Mabel near the gate. His boots sank slightly into the softened ground. Bram leaned against the fence, pretending not to watch Lottie every second. Anna talked with Mabel about training classes. Somewhere inside the store, the old bell above the front door rang and rang again. Mabel handed Lowell a photograph. It showed Mesa lying beside a sunlit window. Behind her were a clean bed, 2 bowls, and an open door leading to a fenced yard washed in pale morning light. Della had written on the back in careful blue ink, "She sleeps through the night now." Lowell read the sentence twice. The puppies tumbled past his feet. Nori broke away long enough to press her nose against his knee, then raced back into the game. Lowell thought of the laundromat awning, the empty basket, the crate door, the greenhouse glass, the sound of Mesa's bowl behind a grocery store before sunrise. He had not lost the family he found. He had only helped it become too large for one house. That evening, He drove home with Nori asleep on the passenger side floor mat, worn out from the yard and the company of her littermates. The sky over Marrow Falls held the pale gold of a season turning. Snow remained in the shaded places, but the roads were mostly clear. Water flashed in the gutters. The railroad tracks behind the old commercial block shone dark and clean. At home, Lowell opened the front door. Nori ran in first. She crossed the kitchen, found his old black glove where he had left it on the chair, and dragged it to the center of the floor. Then she lay down beside it, chin on the leather, one ear up and one ear folded sideways, the pale mark on her chest rising and falling with each breath. Lowell stood in the doorway longer than necessary. The house was still small, still orderly in the places Nori had not yet reached, still his. But it no longer felt like a room built around waiting. It felt like a place someone trusted enough to leave and return to. Lowell hung his jacket by the door, set his keys in the bowl, and sat on the kitchen floor beside the dog who had arrived as a temporary responsibility and stayed as a quiet answer. Nori opened one eye, touched the glove with her paw, and went back to sleep. Outside, the last snow of the season loosened from the roof and fell softly into the yard. Sometimes love does not ask us to hold on tighter. Sometimes it asks us to open the door with steady hands and trust that the right home can be bigger than our own. Lowell thought he was rescuing one lost puppy. In the end, he learned that mercy is not measured by how much we keep, but by how faithfully we care for what God places in our path, even when caring means letting go. In our own lives, we may meet people, animals, or quiet responsibilities that arrive unexpectedly and change the sound of our days. May we have the patience to help gently, the wisdom to know when to release, and the faith to believe that grace can travel farther than one house. Share your thoughts below, especially if this story reminded you of a rescue, a goodbye, or a small act of kindness that stayed with you. And if stories like this bring you comfort, please subscribe and come back for the next one. May peace find your home tonight, and may every life waiting in the cold be guided toward warmth.